Victor Newman no longer hides the fact that he is entering a phase where power is no longer just a goal, but a declaration of existence. In his mind, Genoa City is not a city governed by shared rules, but a chessboard where only one person is allowed to occupy the highest position. And this time, he is no longer interested in half measures, weak negotiations, or temporary compromises. Everything standing in his way must be eliminated. On that list, Phyllis Summers stands out like a thorn that can no longer be allowed to exist. Not because of a single mistake, but because of her entire approach, reckless, unpredictable, and constantly challenging the order Victor tries to impose. To him, Phyllis is not just a business rival, but a symbol of chaos that must be completely controlled. But the most dangerous thing about Victor is not his anger, it is the cold calmness with which he decides to act. There are no warnings, no public declarations. Only silent, carefully calculated moves, layer by layer. As if he is slowly suffocating his opponents using the very system they believe protects them. The Summers Group begins to notice the first unusual signs without being able to identify their source. Contracts are mysteriously delayed, partners suddenly withdraw, and cash flow is disrupted without explanation. It feels like an invisible pressure tightening from all directions at once. Not a direct attack, but a deliberate erosion. Phyllis is the first to realize this is not coincidence. Her survival instincts, sharpened through years of brutal business conflicts, immediately signal that there is an unseen hand at work. But what angers her most is not the risk of losing her company, it is the feeling of being forced into a defensive position by Victor Newman himself. A man who always sees himself as the center of every game. Her fury does not erupt immediately. It builds, digging deeper into every decision, every memory of being pushed into weaker positions in the past. And this time, instead of stepping back, she responds with equally dangerous intensity. She no longer wants only to protect Summers, she wants to prove that Victor cannot dictate everything at will. Meanwhile, Victor remains completely unfazed. In fact, every reaction from Phyllis only confirms to him that his plan is working exactly as intended. He does not view this as an emotional battle, but as a cleansing process. In his world, unstable elements must be removed before they cause a larger collapse. However, what Victor does not admit even to himself is his growing obsession with maintaining absolute control. Not just power, but the deep fear that if one link breaks, the entire structure he has built will begin to fracture. And Phyllis, in his eyes, is one of those dangerous links. As pressure on the Summers Group increases, cracks begin to appear within the company itself. Doubt spreads, strategic decisions are questioned, and fragile alliances start to weaken. No one says it aloud, but everyone can feel that a larger war is unfolding, one they are merely pieces within. Phyllis is forced to confront a bitter reality: this enemy does not strike loudly, but with cold precision. That makes every counterattack harder to predict and easier to neutralize. Yet in this situation, her survival instincts become stronger than ever. She begins searching for weaknesses in Victor's system, not to defend, but to strike back. The tension between both sides is no longer limited to business. It spreads into relationships, old alliances, and buried secrets. In Genoa City, no war exists on a single front. Everything is connected, and every strike produces consequences far beyond expectation. Victor, tightening the net, begins to realize Phyllis is not as easily broken as he assumed. Her recklessness is no longer a weakness, it becomes the most unpredictable factor in the entire board. But instead of adjusting his strategy, he pushes further, as if retreat would mean admitting his own limits. That stubbornness creates an irreversible tension. There is no retreat, no space for compromise. Every next move leads toward an inevitable breaking point that no one can accurately predict. Phyllis begins to understand this is not just a fight to protect a company, but a direct confrontation with a long-established system of power. And to survive, she must accept more dangerous choices, temporary alliances she would never have considered before. Victor does not stop either. He expands his influence, tightens control from multiple angles, and eliminates anything that could disrupt his plan. But the more he acts, the clearer it becomes that this is no longer just a business operation. It is becoming a battle of will, where neither side wants to be the first to back down. In the shadows of Genoa City, everything begins to fall into the orbit of conflict. Small decisions trigger chain reactions. Trust erodes, loyalty is tested, and hidden truths are dragged into the light in ways no one can control. Both Victor and Phyllis understand that the end is approaching, but neither is willing to stop. Because in this war, stepping back does not just mean losing power, it means admitting defeat in the very definition of who they are. And as these two unyielding forces continue to collide, Genoa City once again stands on the edge of a power earthquake where not just one company may fall, but entire empires built on ambition, pride, and absolute control may be shattered completely. As the campaign to tighten control over the Summers Group moves into its next phase, Victor Newman no longer behaves like an ordinary businessman. Every decision he makes is absolute, cold, and leaves no room for resistance. He is no longer interested in weakening his opponent alone, he seeks to redefine the entire power structure of Genoa City in his own image. But that very absolutism begins to create hidden cracks within his own system. Those who were once loyal start to feel the excessive pressure. Alliances built on mutual benefit become strained, as no one is certain they will not be the next potential threat eliminated. Victor does not care. In his mind, fear is not a negative consequence, it is the most effective tool of control. What he fails to realize is that when fear spreads far enough, it no longer produces obedience, it begins to generate resistance. Phyllis Summers senses this shift faster than anyone else. The early signs of a financial attack are no longer subtle hints but an open campaign conducted in the shadows. She becomes more aggressive, no longer limiting herself to defensive strategies. Phyllis understands that if she only reacts, she will always remain at a disadvantage. To survive, she must change the rules of the game. The anger within her is no longer just an emotional reaction, it becomes fuel for every strategic decision. She expands her network, reconnects with old alliances, and even exploits unresolved conflicts between different power players in the city. In Phyllis's world, there are no permanent allies, only temporary interests. Each move she makes resembles a calculated counterattack under disadvantageous conditions. But the dangerous shift is that Phyllis is no longer acting solely to protect Summers. A new objective begins to emerge within her, proving that Victor Newman is not untouchable. Meanwhile, Victor begins to notice stronger than expected resistance. Not because his plan is failing, but because his opponent is not collapsing in the way he anticipated. This creates a deeply uncomfortable feeling within him, one he rarely admits, the imperfection of control. He intensifies the pressure, expanding his attacks across multiple areas, not only financial but also reputation, partnerships, and market trust. Each strike is designed to create a cascading effect, leaving Summers unable to recover quickly. But as he widens his reach, he faces a more complex reality. This is no longer a one-sided battle. Backlash begins to emerge, not only from Phyllis but also from third parties dragged into the spiral. Genoa City, already filled with fragile alliances, begins to shift when disturbed with enough force. Phyllis exploits this chaos to create openings. She does not need to defeat Victor directly, she only needs to slow his system, make it question itself, and start breaking down from within. This is a strategy Victor dislikes, not confrontation, but erosion. The difference in their approaches creates a more dangerous form of conflict than open warfare. There are no clear battle lines, no defined endpoint. Only continuous escalation, where each side tries to prove it cannot be broken. Victor becomes increasingly rigid in his internal decisions. Warnings are ignored, adjustment proposals are dismissed immediately. He believes that maintaining enough pressure will eventually force his opponent to collapse. But this rigidity begins to create distance between him and those around him. Meanwhile, Phyllis moves deeper into the gray zone of strategy. She understands that to stand against Victor, she cannot maintain her old identity. Choices once considered risky now become necessary tools. And each of these decisions pulls her further away from her original safe ground. Tension escalates to the point where both sides begin to accept losses as an inevitable part of the war. No one is calculating damage in the usual way anymore. The only objective is not to be the first to fall. In the shadows of Genoa City, the confrontation between Victor Newman and Phyllis Summers is no longer merely a business conflict. It becomes a symbol of two ideologies: absolute power that refuses compromise, and adaptive survival willing to break every rule. And as both continue pushing each other to the limit, the city is no longer merely observing the battle, it has become the battlefield itself, where every decision can trigger a collapse far greater than anyone can control.